And welcome everybody to the show tonight, and we're joined at the moment by, of course, the co-host and extraordinary discussion panelist, Xbox Fiend. Thank you, Xbox.
Hey.
And also, of course, Gus is in early. Great to see you, Gus. How you doing this week?
Hello.
Oh, it wouldn't be the same without you. And we've got Cerberus X here to counterbalance. He's not an atheist. I should just say that straight away. He's, in fact, someone slightly different. So what are you, would you say?
I'm a theist, agnostic atheist.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. That really helps. But there you go. So that's the show today. It's a general talk thing. I'm going to put the link out in the chat for those that don't already have it. If you are in, welcome. I can see out there. Let's just highlight a few little bits here. Christopher says, "Where's the garlic? Where indeed is the garlic? There's only one healthy place to put garlic. We all know where that is. So if you have any garlic knobs out there, put them in the right place." And then welcome, Laura. Thank you. Good to see you. Don't do any heavy. Don't do it with onions. It'll make you cry. Yes, it will. And hopefully this won't make you cry. But we are down to the second layer this week. So thanks very much for that. I'm going to be putting the link out there soon. As soon as we just pass it over to Xbox, and then we'll get a few words from our current guests, and then bring people on as and when. So over to you, Xbox. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Kind of want to talk tonight. We talked a lot about presuppositionalism last time, so kind of want to talk about evidentialism, and has it fallen out of fashion with theistic arguments mostly, right? Evidentialism is a thesis in epistemology, which states that one's justified to believe something if and only if that person has evidence which supports their belief. So I want to kind of put feelers out there of how y'all feel about that and what you've come across. Serb, or let's start there. You have any thoughts on it?
I'm more of a reliabilist, so I think there are ways to come about, at least on an everyday sort of basis, beyond just having like evidence. Especially if you have like a good standard of evidence, you can't use that for everything. I'm a little bit of a skeptic when it comes to truth. It seems to just be a property of sentences that are just fiction to start with. So I'm not evidentialist. I think it's misguided.
Interesting. Okay.
If left on its own, like reliabilist, I acknowledge evidence justifies things, but I don't think it's the only way to do it.
Okay,
Right,
that'll
for
be
sure.
a counterpoint. That'll be a counterpoint. That's presumably the theistic part of you speaking. Okay, over to Gus. Gus, evidentialism. How have you got on with that over the years?
Well, I
And,
think about just about every time, particularly Christian theology has tried to ground itself in fact, it's only been able to do so on a very limited basis. I mean, yes, there was a person named Jesus, well, Yeshua ben Miriam, who wandered the earth, you know, got his own people really mad at him, and they made the Romans kill him, right? That this we know. But apart from that, was there a flood? How much of a flood was there? Was there an ark? Could the whole concept of an ark work? Given the basic biological realities that we now understand today. Um, that's just one example of the fact that just about every time we turn over, a rock of mystery in the world, we don't find God sitting under it in a lawn chair sipping a mojito. We find science. We find, the basic building blocks of reality. And this is one of the reasons I think particularly the last 30 years, there are very few evidential apologists left for theism. The one that I know that still operates openly is hello, my name is Ken Hovitt. And
What
that man, you can go through his infamous slideshows, and every single solitary one of them is factually incorrect. Every single one of them is factually incorrect. Like, this has got to be some sort of a fucking record, So this is one of the reasons why I think people are. Yeah. Are we live? Are we live?
We're live. It's criminal. It's not just a record. It's criminal.
It's well, yeah. I mean, it's both a criminal record and a record of criminality. And so I think that's one of the reasons why over the last 30 years they've shifted to precept, because you can't win with evidentialism anymore. You just can't. It may not be dead, but it should be.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'd like to just pass it over to Mr. Nick Suter. Welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us. I saw you in the chat last week. We appreciate that, and it's
my pleasure.
An honor to have you on, sir. Evidentialism. I'd like to just go back actually and start how you found the Great Debate community, if you wouldn't mind, and then
the original GDC. Well, the original GDC, the original GDC ended before I realized you could stream on YouTube or the meets. So,
I found it. You hadn't heard of God before that, no?
Well, I'd heard of God. I hadn't met the. You know what, Simos? I've been here like 10 seconds.
I'm sorry. I'll leave it to you. Just do an intro for us. Who are you? What do you like?
My name is Nick Suter. I am the executive producer and host of In Time. About anything that's sort of current events. We also have shows that discuss individual elements of philosophy or psychology or whatever, and a number of people listening to this have been on and watched, so which I'm very thankful for. So we've recently just been covering Ukraine a lot. We recently had Lieutenant General Ben Hodges on. He's the former head of NATO. He's the Supreme Commander of all ground forces for NATO. He was also the Supreme Commander of all U.S. forces in Europe, and we had him on to discuss Ukraine. So that's sort of, we try to get on experts and talk about it. So that's what we
do. Nice.
Okay, go ahead, Xbox. You take it.
I missed the. Please.
Nick talk. Yeah.
I missed the question early on, but I think I can reconstitute it enough to give an answer. I think there's probably no capital T truth out there, but I think it's very useful to act as if there's one, because I think it's the goal of trying to find it that has historically caused us to examine how we get evidence. It wasn't without, I think, this belief in a capital T truth that we would have even really got the scientific method down. It was like, there's got to be a way to understand what's going on. Well, there may or may not, and there may be an ultimate truth. We'll probably never find it, but trying to, I think, makes us understand our world better, which is about as close to an absolute good as you can get. I think it is true that you cannot prove any one thing as fact. You end up, if you try long enough, you'll bump into what is it, Agrippa's dilemma or the Munchausen trilemma, which we can get into at some point if we want to talk about. You also, of course, bump into Hume's problem of induction, any number of other issues. But people take that to the step where they say, well, if you can't demonstrate any single fact is true, then all things are sort of equal, and how do you know that anything is true? Well, we do have degrees of certainty, and I think we've demonstrated that you can actually claim that. Certainly, even if we couldn't claim that, even if we couldn't rationally justify that claim, all the coins of the realm cannot be counterfeit. If everything is false, it's the same thing as saying everything is true. So the only way to operate going forward anyway is to assume that we can know some things to different degrees of certainty. So once you've accepted that, once you understand how and why we kind of have to operate that way, everything else is built on that layer. So I think we obviously want to control nature. We want to control the world around us. We want electricity. We want, better tasting cornflakes and stuff like that. And the only way to do that is to understand the nature of reality as best we can. So I think any endeavor to understand it better helps us for the most part. And the only way to do that is through rational evidence-based methodologies. They're not perfect. They are faulty, but they're better than they've ever been, and we've accomplished more in the last 400 years using the scientific method than the human species accomplished in the 100,000 years before that. So that's good enough for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. And I would push back on one little thing, but I'll do it off air with you if you're still around.
I'd love to. Look me up on the Discord. We'll talk. I love talk. Simos will tell you I will talk to anybody. I'll keep. In fact, if someone doesn't hit the mute button, I'm liable to just keep going for the next 2 minutes straight. So.
Yeah, no, that was great, and I want to bring in here. Laura. It's actually been quite a while since me and you have talked. I think it was our last time was back on Skype, and
yeah,
so I'd like to hear your views on it.
Well, to be honest, truth is one of those amusing things because it's important to realize that it's one of those terms that people use quite fluidly. That one person's truth is another person's not quite true. And I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but what I mean is that I always prefer the case. If you say what is the case, you're trying to frame it along a sort of logical sense rather than what someone believes to be true, what someone believes to be the case. And my analogy, because I basically say that truth is flexible. And I don't mean that the facts or the elements themselves are flexible. The reality of the situation is flexible. It's more a case of our perception of it is flexible. So, for example, and I've used this before, imagine you're at a school and there's some event going on and they're using like classrooms as somewhere to sit and have your dinner. So what happens is I go and I take an apple out of my bag and I put it on the table I'm eating, and then I need to go to the toilet. So I go to the toilet, I come back, and my apple is gone, and someone across the room is eating my apple. And in my mind, I think, you just stole my apple. I say, you just stole my apple. What I don't realize is that they brought their own apple and someone else walked out of the room a minute ago with my apple. So the reality is that I'm wrong, but it's true for me in the moment that I think that.
Right.
So another thing worth mentioning is Kent Hovind was mentioned. He structures his claims more obviously than he structured his finances.
Definitely.
Nice. That's the kind of thing I like. Okay, thank you so much for coming on, Laura. We appreciate that. It's good to see you.
Actually, I've just remembered. I have a personal truth one that is quite amusing. So, when the whole COVID thing was going on, I bought myself a big TV, and then I discovered that my old DVD player won't work with it because new TV doesn't have a SCART socket, and that's all that I had for my old DVD player. So I went to the store to buy a new one, and it's in the back of a supermarket. I'm coming out of the supermarket. I'm wearing a mask because it was COVID. And old lady's coming in, and I stop and I put my hand out to say, "You go first," kind of thing, that motion. And she goes, No. Pregnant women go first. And I laughed. And I said, "I'm not pregnant. I'm just fat." And she's like, "Oh, my God, I'm so sorry." I said, No, don't worry about it. And then I explained to her that I'm trans and I couldn't get pregnant even if I wanted to. But if you said that to a cis woman, it would be mortifying. But for me, it was gender affirming, because for those couple of moments between her looking at me and making an assessment that she believed to be the case, believed to be true, it wasn't true. So it, like I say, it was gender affirming, because for those few seconds, in her mind, I was a pregnant lady. You don't get that very often. So it's an amusing little thing where, like I say, that truth was flexible. It was true for her when she first saw it, but then, information came along. It's like, I'm not correct about that. And I think the difference between myself and the more dyed-in-the-wool Christian types, they need things to be true, the things that they want to believe to be true, and don't really care about what the reality might be. They can't entertain that because the whole doctrination of like, if I don't believe this, I'm going to go to hell type territory.
May I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
If that's, I think that's a very workable definition of truth, but if that's how we're going to use it, how do you differentiate between that and things that are objectively true, assuming that you believe there is such a thing?
Well, like I say, we have to. I'm not sure how to answer that. I suppose we just have to try and figure it out as best we can. And I think that someone else I've said years ago, certainty is the purest form of ignorance. If you're absolutely certain of something, you can't be dissuaded that it couldn't possibly be anything other than what they want to believe, then they don't care about truth.
Oh, I think that's very true. Definitely, absolutely.
Well, see, and you can actually.
When you say true, do you mean true, or do you mean the case true? I'm sorry.
Well, me personally, or was that rhetorical?
It was a rhetorical joke.
Okay.
Well, see, and there's different outlooks on truth, like the correspondence theory, the coherence theory, right? There's going to be depending on who you're talking to, is kind of the answer you're going to get on true. And I'm going to introduce this other person in just a minute, but you're also going to have a different look when you're talking about evidence, period. Like what that is and what it indicates, I guess. So, but since we have another guest in here, Christopher Mowdy, let's give him the floor for a minute.
What's up, suckers?
On there. Hey, man.
How you doing, Nick?
Good.
Doing good, thank you. How about yourself?
Oh, there's more than one Nick. Oh my God.
You knew that.
Le Mauti.
He's been here 10 seconds. He's been starting to cause trouble, which is a pretty good indicator of why he's such good friends with Simos.
Listen. Okay. Simos is an angel.
Oh.
That's all I have to say.
Absolutely.
The very hand of God just reached down and touched my forehead. Let me know that Simos is an angel from heaven.
God
Anything
damn
else?
it!
Be
God
talking
damn
to
it,
an
you
angel.
Catholics!
Must
Oh,
be
oh,
He is a
oh.
very
an
godly
angel.
man.
So before I address the actual topic at hand, I'm going to address Gus's Catholic comment and also the hand from God touching me on the forehead comment. So I just got back from visiting Mom Audi in Jersey, and she's very Catholic, and was was teaching me about all the different levels of angels. So you guys are familiar with like seraphims and archangels and blah 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
She was talking to me about that as if she was explaining information from an encyclopedia.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And it made her happy, and she was just like, "Can you believe that they have the catalog to all these angels?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's pretty impressive, huh, Mom?" Like in those situations, I feel like such a fucking idiot. Like I don't know how to address, like I don't know how to validate the idea that those things exist. And at the same time, I don't want to bust my mom's chops too much. But it was a bit to sit through. So, anyways, that's the whole Catholicism bit that I wanted to rant about because Gus is busting my goddamn balls.
That's right.
Bust you right back. That's right.
All right.
You're allowed to bust my balls.
That's absolutely.
You're one of the few.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I hope she's doing well, Christopher. Really
Oh
do.
yeah, she's
Really
fucking tough as nails. I swear to
sounds
God.
like it.
Yeah, I don't know
Sounds
where the
like
fuck she gets it from.
Were you raised as a Catholic, Chris?
Oh God, yeah, I was raised Catholic until I reached the age of reason.
Oh
Right.
gosh! So basically, you were brought up on a diet.
And then he escaped.
Yeah,
Now,
basically, you
that-
were brought up on a diet of pasta and guilt.
Well, yeah, because it was Roman Catholic, so you got that right instead of potatoes and guilt. If I was Irish Catholic, right?
So when you say the age of reason, Christopher, do you mean 16 or do you mean 7? Just
No,
for
I mean, I've
a friend that we'll
Jesus.
watch later. Just
I'm
asking.
actually 6,000 years old, so I'm talking about the literal age of reason.
Okay.
So as
Well,
it
how do you
pertains,
feel?
So you've been around since the beginning of the earth, is what you're trying to tell us.
well, according to Kent Hovind, I predate the Earth.
Oh, just come on down here. That's SpongeBob thinking. Come on down here. We'll sort you out.
Yeah, but Kent, I don't understand why you are such a man of God, considering that you are so against the very environment that you live in. Kent, can you explain to me why you deny being a sovereign citizen while simultaneously behaving exactly like one?
Well,
Thank
I was
you.
born at an early age.
That's good. That's a deep cut, Gus.
Born at an early age. You have to buy my book and my other book too, and send all that money directly to me. Don't send it to the government because the government is of Satan, and don't send it to my son either. He'll spend it on hair products.
Well, that's the funny part. So Kent Hovind started with like this idea of share my information, like, make copies of my videos and hand them out. And then as soon as the intertubes took over, he was copyright striking people. So they had to be like, yo, here's what's in the intro of the VHS Kent Hovind video that I am, commenting on.
Right. He turned. It was turned
Very
around on
difficult to have
himself.
very difficult to have a successful copyright strike when you're telling people they can use it for whatever they want.
Yeah.
The problem was that people started slicing up parts of it, and then those dirty atheists, dirty. I'm looking at you, Suitor. Those dirty atheists. They're chopping it up and putting it on YouTube and making money that he wasn't making. Yeah. Meanwhile, that IRS, the most infernal of all services, right, is chasing him around for money and structuring, and he's having to stuff money down his wife's shirt and stuff. It's horrible.
If I remember correctly, Nick Suitor took him to task.
I know he did.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I took him to task, but yes, I certainly enjoyed I actually really enjoyed that debate. I enjoyed. It was on Evolution, and it was on his channel. So
and you prepped for that for a little while. Who did you prep with?
Myself. I went over. I saw every other video, and I tried to learn the pattern of his arguments and tried to figure out what they were, so that in my intro I could already set up. The biggie I did was I'd put I put in the intro all these whale bones and said, okay, this, and I actually didn't do a whole bunch of it, just like one or two. And he said, well, all the whale bones are male, and his usual argument on that. And I said, well, actually, I put these whale bones in the intro that you saw, and I put the museum numbers on there, and if you look, you can find, and you will find that they're all female. As well, that's not really true. I said, well, I thought you might say that, so I called the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and arranged for the two of us to have a necropsy of a female whale, and we can see if they have these bones or not. And I said, well, I can't really afford it. I said, that's why I've already set aside enough money to cover your plane ticket, this, that. And he said, well, I'm very busy and I don't think I can leave the state. I said, I'm very sorry to hear that. This is the closest Oceanographic Institute to you. It's 2 hours away. They've also agreed to do a necropsy with you. Would you join me for that? To which he said no.
Right.
Well, you remember,
ouch.
don't you, Matty?
That sounds crafty as fuck.
Ow.
That was clever.
Matty,
That was
you
clever. I got
remember back in the G Plus days when it was me and Thor. I don't know if you remember Thor.
I do remember Thor's from European, right?
Yeah, Russian Tiger.
That's right.
Yep. Me and him did 2 debates with his son, Kit, or
Good old
Eric.
Eric.
Good old Eric. Where's the money?
We did
Eric?
one on presupposition and one on evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Those were both for his DVDs.
Uh-huh.
So
really?
I think he's following in his father's footsteps. I'm not sure if he was, because they kind of had a splitting out, or breaking up.
They did. But actually, since we're talking about Hovind, bringing it back to the original question of evidentialism, in my mind, Hovind was the prototypical or the exemplar of the evidentialist argument. And in my opinion, the way that I see the timeline of, YouTube is where, or the internet is where religion goes to die. That's where the evidentialist argument went to die, right? And that's where the presup argument kind of started to take over, because Kent Hovind was making a big deal online with all of his YouTube videos. Then he went to jail, and Psi 10 became popular. Eric, his son, glommed onto the Psi 10 thing before they parted ways. Yeah.
Well,
and then the presup argument
Psi
took
10
over.
ended up having a zipper problem, apparently.
Oh yeah, young girls. It's always the same fucking reason, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, Matty. You hit the nail on the head.
The whole hill schlong.
So that's how I remember the arc of the Great Debate. Like, it was always evidentialist arguments. It was always, like, who knew their science more, and then the presup argument came around, and atheists became like philosophy boners for logic.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, to an embarrassing
and
degree.
still are. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because the presup stuff it only works if the atheist is being honest and open when they are being exactly the opposite.
Yep.
Yeah, they're taking advantage of, like, just basic good graces of conversation. Oh, could you be wrong? Really? Because I can't. It's like, oh, Jesus Christ. Like, where did this conversation just go?
A lot of online theists at the time seemed to think that the measure of the quality of a conversation was how long it was chronologically, and that kept them from saying, you know what, this is special pleading. Your whole thingamy with how could you know that, and how could I know this, and God tells me but he doesn't tell you. All this shit is special pleading. That's all it is. You're being dishonest. You have a really nice day. We're finished now. Bye-bye.
But that raises the question for me, like, because I want to see the best in people, and even people who are using the presup argument, they would consider personal revelation as evidence. Matt Bell, another person who has a problem with
degenerate
everything,
Hashtag not a drag queen.
Why did I bring him up? Because just to make fun of him. No,
I don't know,
it's probably the Kalam. If I know my Matt Bell.
I mean, the worst thing that we did was give the presup oxygen and not identify it immediately and shun it the second it showed up.
Because it's difficult to do that, right? Because
not.
Bonson,
It really
Bonson
isn't.
and Van Til kind of made it impenetrable
Mowdy,
to the
but you and I
layperson.
both know that the kind of precept
Yeah,
that we
exactly,
saw on
Mowdy.
the internet, you and I both know the kind of precept we saw on the internet was at best a flying gas can version of the true Bonson Van Til stuff. Nobody saw Bonson and Van Til on the internet.
But that's what made it difficult to argue, Gus, because in the same way that Christians were dealing with different levels of atheists who know how to argue, as an atheist, when you dealt with a precept Christian, some of them were very well versed, like Dustin Seegers in the Van Til and the Bonson stuff. So you didn't know what flavor you were getting. Are you getting just the trappings of philosophy, like the Psi 10 version, or are you getting something that's a little more deep rooted?
Precept at its core is dishonest. And so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, but that stretches the scope of this discussion. We're not talking about the great debate community anymore when we're saying
I'm saying Van Til and Bonson were dishonest. Precept is dishonest.
Well, of course I think that.
Okay, so one of the ways that we as a community of intellectuals were taken advantage of is that our desire to have long, fruitful conversations, no matter how fast they ended up driving us into a fucking brick wall, we're played on. We're tickled gently. One of the greatest threats that you watch enough of these videos, one of the greatest threats that's held over, people, we the atheists, is the threat to break off the conversation. Right? If you don't stop, or if you're not gentler to me, I'll break off the conversation. Right? And using that plus the innate honesty of most intellectuals, most true intellectuals. I mean, those things were played to the hilt, and people ended up having conversations far longer than it took to straight up expose the innate bullshit of the presupposition.
Yeah, also, Gus, you're impatient.
It's true.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't make what I'm saying untrue.
No, I'm not saying it's not a no, but it's a yes and. Yeah. Yes, I agree with you, and you're impatient. So what you consider a long conversation, I might not consider a long conversation.
I've some of Christopher's best.
And whilst I have admired some of your long shit kickings of multiple pre-subs,
hey brother, that's how we met. Like
it's true, and that's great and all, but it doesn't. I can say what I've said, even though it acts against my best interests down the line, right? So, I mean, the truth is the truth, whether or not it serves me or not. And as far as I'm concerned, in this case, the truth is what I have said earlier.
Okay, well, there was a couple of things.
Can I bring it?
Before you do, I just want to say this: a couple of things, just history-wise, just to document it. Alex Boston, of course, had a conversation. Was it with Psi 10?
Yes.
And also Thunderfoot Live convention once had a conversation with Psi 10 as well. Those were the first two examples I had of people rebutting Presup, and I didn't really get what it was about at the time. Just to say that I agree that the community didn't catch on nearly quick enough, and it wasn't really till the Pal Talkers came into Nadia's and started shitting from a great height all over Darth Dawkins, or Evolution False as he was called back then.
And the reason that they worked, by the way, just as a second note to that, just to add into what you're saying, the reason they worked is because they took, because what had been done earlier is that the pre-suppers had taken advantage of the innate gentleness and politeness. The guys like all those lovely people at the place and stuff like that. And the Pal Talkers went, no, I'm going to do to you what you've been doing to us. I'm going to make you work for all of it. Every last word of it. Go back.
I just want to wrestle.
What's your argument for that? Every step of the way.
Doxaxical and Troxaxical. Philosophy linguistics.
That was great. I should have. What was the guy's name again?
Michael Jones, Dr. Jones.
I just want to have everybody should just have a love feast, and I just want everybody to love on each other. And
I'm just trying to wrestle. I just need to wrestle with this idea. of Christians
Anyway,
loving
if you could tell
atheists.
me the
Let-
Loved
indexicality
watching him.
and the finger lickality of the situation,
yeah, I
and
bring-
you could just see like the Eric Hoven's eyes and Slayton's eyes going tilt, no sale. It's hilarious.
brilliant. Yes,
Yeah.
Thunderfoot was with Eric
Sorry.
Hovind. Yeah, absolutely. That was
No,
who it was. I was
Can I
thinking.
bring it back a little bit to the evidence?
Before you
Leslie,
do,
'cause
Before you do,
the-
I just got a couple of
no,
things.
shut up.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I don't mind. I was just going to say, just to bring it up to date. You know, when the fact that they did that and gave it back to him, the power talkers I'm talking about, was in the end, I think, a bad thing for the atheist community as a whole, as it kind of weaponized the philosophy into something which was used just to defeat an argument, rather than actually expound upon what good arguments were, which I think is the key difference.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that I regret about
You know-
evidentialism being taken over by Presup, is that
Yeah.
we were challenging ourselves to learn science and learn evidence in a much more rigorous way.
I honestly think that Presup was a boon to atheism as a movement because way more atheists are philosophically savvy. Or let me put that
Right.
differently. Way more atheists are more philosophically savvy now because they kind of have to deal with precepts in their like bag of tricks. Whereas like before the precept argument, we like, you know, you just needed to be a scientist that was really good at explaining geology to knock down the evidentialist arguments.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Son of Gallus
Actually,
Rex
on
is
that,
asking a question here. If we could just get a quick answer. What
Pick a
does
person.
he mean by presup argument?
There's an argument that presupposes the conclusion in some fact, even if it's not in the argument itself, the person believes it. And you need to believe it in order to make one of the propositions in the argument.
Yes.
You know,
Right.
it's actually quite funny because only this week I had a YouTube backwards and forwards with someone in comments about presup. They tried presupping me, and I, based upon the dishonesty of presup, I made an atheist one and I explained it to them, and I'll read it out because I might as well, you know, and it explains, you know, it's basically God did it. And I'm presupposing that God did it. So there you go. That's it, really. And I can just ignore everything you say because you aren't all based on rationalism, you know. But here it comes. So a long time ago, in another universe, a being called Bob decided to create a universe just because he wanted to see what happened. In Bob's universe, the laws of physics work differently, so something can come from nothing. And that's how Bob's species came about. Over time, that species advanced to a point where they had the technological advancement to be able to create planets and universes. So Bob created this universe, life and everything, including the laws of logic. That Yahweh thing, yeah, that's just an ancient myth created by a tribe who are unable to answer the big question. So no God required. If you're a Christian, you'll say, oh, you just made that up. How could you possibly know that without stealing from my worldview? You can't even use the laws of logic without stealing from my worldview. Everything you say and do is and think of is contingent on Bob. And just change Bob to God, the Christian God, exactly the same thing. And this is where presupposing things leads. A Bob-esque creator of the universe has as much validity in a presuppositional sense than Yahweh. The only difference is how many people believe in it, and that becomes a fallacy of its own, argumentum ad populum. This is a reductio ad absurdum argument. And I had someone try to presup me against this. And their reply was, presup justifies the Christian God with the transcendental argumentation, which is a deductively valid form of justification. So we're going solipsism here. 1, if X did not exist, Y would not be possible. 2, Y is possible. 3, therefore X exists. X is the Christian God. Y is the knowledge, rational thought, intelligibility, science, etc. And my reply was simply, yeah, change X to Bob, and it's the same argument. You know?
Yep,
if Bob
absolutely. Okay, just would like to welcome Faith. Long time no see, Faith. You okay? Did you have anything you wanted to add on evidentialism? Okay, no worries.
Yeah. I'll jump off what Laura was saying, and then because Maudie brought up the question: is revelation evidence? And this is what a evidentialist or a preceptor will rely on. They'll say, you know, revelation from God is my evidence for X, Y, Z.
Yes, it's been revealed to me in a way I know it to be true.
Right, right. And maybe I'll get some hate for this, but I'm going to say that if everybody knows a colloquial or a philosophical definition of evidence, you'll be able to follow a little bit. I would say this is evidence from within the Christian worldview, doing an internal critique of their worldview. Revelation is going to be evidence.
True.
Evidence, weak or strong, however you want to put it, but it actually informs or raises the probability of their belief. Now, from outside of it, looking in us, you know, critiquing their view, of course not. Revelation is I would still maybe call it evidence, but it fails at actually raising the probability or backing up the belief that proposition is true. How do any of y'all feel about looking at evidence that way?
Well, I'm with you, and I use it against them. Right? When they say, what evidence do you have for being an atheist? I say, I've never had personal revelation.
Oh, okay. I'm in. Okay, I'm in.
Here we go.
Okay. Yeah, here we go. Okay, go.
I think it's evidence, but I think you have two different standards. You have evidence that is evidence to you personally, and then you have evidence that you can actually give to other people that would be acceptable. Like I can prove to myself that I exist, but really when it comes down to it, I can't actually prove to someone else that I exist.
Well, sure, there's a difference in using evidence to convince someone else and then having evidence that just convinces you. If that's kind of what you're saying, I agree with that.
It seems to
go, please. Yeah, rail on.
Well, no, it seems to me that evidence, when you use the word evidence, it's evidence of what, right? Because something can be an evidence for one claim or by one set of standards, and not for another claim or another set of standards. I think normally when people talk about evidence, at least in the circles I hang out in, and it certainly doesn't necessarily speak for everybody, but it usually means evidence for something that directly affects more than one person. If I had a revelation, it may change how I view the rest of the world and how I interact in it, and therefore it is evidence of something that has affected my psychology and affects how I interact in the world. But it's not evidence for anything outside of that, and having that narrow a use of the term evidence, I think, is not usually productive, except again in a very narrow set of, if I'm talking to that person and say, why do you believe? Well, it's evidence for them, and that is meaningful to them. And if you care about them or having an engagement with them, then it's meaningful in that set of constructs. But outside of it, it's not. And since it's not really relevant outside of the construct of that person, using evidence to mean specifically something about their exclusively subjective experience makes the word so watered down. I'm not sure it has meaning after that.
But now we're delving into the psychology of belief in general, right? Like, here's a belief that I have, and if you don't have it, I need to have arguments to persuade you onto, like, assuming a philosophically neutral environment, right? But it just seems like belief, like we're just talking about the psychology of belief at this point. Like, okay, like how, whether it's about gods or not, I believe that whatever, fill in the blank. And like Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, like, that there is optimism in the world, that there is love between humans. Like, all of these are claims of belief that require evidence. So regardless of what the claim is, these seem to be belief claims in general.
If I had a revelation and I saw God, is that evidence? Well, again, it depends on the constructs that we're bringing to the table when we're discussing it. It is, for me, maybe evidence, and I say, okay, it's all this evidence. I think it is even evidence outside of me, because if enough people have that, if you have 1 million people who wake up one morning and they all had the exact same revelation, all at the exact same time, that would mean something. So really the difference between one or the other, if one person had it, but you don't know how many other people had it, I think it's very, very, very weak evidence. But I could, as somebody I know would say, I'd buy that for $1. But anyways, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Being raised in a community of musicians that are known to experiment with drugs and things like that, like I am familiar with friends who have taken psychedelic trips that have been super meaningful to them in ways that they could never communicate to me. But it's been life-changing for them in ways that they point to that event, right? And this isn't religion. This is a chemically induced, right? What's the diff? That becomes the question. All right, so how do we know the difference between this chemically and this is just what the fucking brain does? It's not some external thing that's providing it, unless you consider LSD the external exogenous thing that's stimulating the what's the opposite of exogenous? Endogenous neuroreceptors. But I mean, it's not the hand of God. It's just a chemical reaction. And then once you realize that, it's like looking at personal revelation for a religious phenomenon. It blurs the distinction between like, oh, well, that's just what the brain does under certain circumstances, and I can evoke that predictably with this drug. So I don't know. I kind of rambled, but I hope some of it is useful.
Okay, then I got a question on this, and this may sound stupid, but I've kind of struggled back and forth with this. So let's say you're trying to look for evidence of what could possibly cause enough harm to you that it would end your life. Right, you try to figure out just to avoid it. Right, you have a friend named Timmy, and one day you and Timmy walking down the railroad tracks, and Timmy's like, "I've had enough," and he jumps in front of the train and dies. Now, did you just learn of some evidence that a train can kill you, or did you just learn some evidence that a train can kill Timmy?
Well, by itself, neither. What you need is context. When you realize what a train is, when you realize how mass works, when you realize how fast it's moving, when you realize what happens to all human beings when they encounter that mass, at least has throughout history, and it's quite a long history. When you discover that it can do that to a car, if somebody puts a car on when you discover that your body is not as strong as a car, when you add up all those things, I would actually argue you still can't say for 100% certainty, but you can say in any meaningful and practical sense, it wasn't that Timmy was hit by the train. It's that Timmy was hit by a train, and you already know Timmy is human, just like you, and you know what the train is, and it's the sum of all. But if that had happened when you were 2 years old, it wouldn't mean the same thing as when you have all the rest of the evidence to add up with it.
Yeah, and I also want to disagree with the framing of the question, because applying it to whether it kills him or no, you learned that a train is a weapon that can kill, right? So I don't necessarily see how that is like, oh, that is particular to that, or it's particular to me. It's like, no, that implicit learning is generalized.
Well, that comes to the second part of the question. How do you know that you're the same type of creature that Timmy is?
Oh, but yeah, but that gets back to what we were talking about before, right? Yeah. Convincing somebody else that I exist.
Well, I mean, we can do a reducto, and the longer we do a reducto, eventually we'll hit Agrippa's dilemma or the Munchausen trilemma if we do it far enough. And so we could just jump to that if that's the question. But you just take, again, I said at the beginning, you can't know that any one fact is true. But you can add up all of the things that you've seen that you're pretty sure are true to say you have a much greater probability. So the probability that you are like Timmy as opposed to really a Kryptonian who was, dropped off and your parents never told you, but actually, that's actually possible, but the likelihood is so remote that, well, how do I know it's remote? Well, again, all of these facts. And what you can say is, yeah, but none of those facts you knew for a certainty, which is true. But there is still a degree of probability, and that gets right back to what I said at the beginning. There's a mistake often made which says, well, if I can't know any one of them, then I can't say anything is more probable than another, and that is not true, and that's a whole another thing if we want to get into it.
Correct me if I'm wrong there, but I want to highlight that the use of probability as you were using it there is the sense of probability that's a feeling, right? Not actual statistics, right?
Well, it's a sense of probability. It's a sense of probability. It is what is a feeling we can get into, because there's a difference between feelings and an impression that you get as a result of the sum total of what you both consciously and unconsciously can remember as the experiences of your life.
Well, I can make it even simpler. I mean, the way that I understood what Nick was saying is humans have this. It is currently accepted in cognitive neuroscience that humans have this thing called predictive learning. That's how we learn language, and it's also called probabilistic learning, where it's our ability to, over a repeated series of iterations of exposure, we're able to delineate morphemes from phonemes, from sentences, from words from sentences and shit like that. There,
I have a very practical example of what we're talking about here. So in 1830, it was the opening of the very first passenger railway from Liverpool to Manchester. And what happened was, for this big opening, this brand new train was unveiled. And so train goes off, and halfway it has to stop to get water. And so the passengers get out and start looking around or whatever. And next thing you know, there's another train coming towards them at a massive 30 miles per hour. And people scramble to get away. And the Duke of Wellington, who was the Prime Minister, I think it was Duke of Wellington, so he jumped to try and grab on to the train. And the door opened and he got killed. And the train went over his leg. He died of shock. And that was that. Now, the thing is, for us, we want to cross the road, a 30-mile-an-hour road. We can look up the street and we have an idea what 30 miles an hour is. Then they didn't, because the fastest you could go was riding horse fast. So, they didn't have the mental conception of what 30 miles an hour was. Their ability to avoid this thing was diminished by a way that for us, it's just obvious today. But for them, it wasn't. I just find that fascinating, how that realization is born out of experience.
Would you agree, at least, that we can say some things that we claim as fact are more probable than others?
Oh, sure. I'm not suggesting otherwise.
Okay, yeah. So I was asking. So how would you? So, Gus, if you accept that, then really the question is that it sounds like what you're asking is, how do we determine what is more probable and based on because I mean, again, I opened at the beginning. I don't think you could claim that you know for certain any facts. So Timmy gets hit by a train. I don't know for a fact that it would happen if that I would die. Maybe the train would stop, hit me, and the train would derail, and I'd be like, hey. But the reality is, I have enough experience in my life by now to know, A, that's never happened before, B, it's unlikely to happen if I do it, and C, the risk is not worth the reward in even trying to find out. Oh, did I not?
I heard you. Everyone just got quiet for some reason.
Oh, all right. Well, so no, I mean, I was just so are we? When you're asking, how do I know that Timmy's not going to get hit, or sorry, that it won't happen to me? I'm trying. I guess I'm trying to figure out if you agree that some facts are more likely than another. And I'm not saying I know for a fact it won't happen, but I know to such a degree of certainty it's not even worth questioning. If that's the case, why wouldn't I know that? I guess I think I've demonstrated why I claim I would know that it would happen to me if I went up. So why is it even a question that's worth asking?
Okay.
Oh, because
Go ahead.
I think all the evidence that you would build up around, well, this would happen to me, If I did the same thing happened to me that happened to Timmy. I think, like you said, it's you're building a ballistic case, and you don't actually have any evidence itself that it will happen to you. You have evidence that it's likely.
Oh, now I see why you framed it the way that you did.
Yeah.
That was because I wanted to know. I wanted
Yeah,
to
Remember, if
ask
you're an
about that.
evidentialist, you have to have the evidence before you believe the thing.
Well, I would agree, and I would agree that you cannot say for certainty that any one fact, including that the train would do the same thing to me, you cannot say beyond all doubt that anything is a fact. So I'd agree with that.
I like to call myself a little bit of a give me a fucking breakist. Because
Yeah, that's fair.
because frankly, what tends to happen is that when you question the evidence that's brought forth by an evidentialist, or often that evidence is questioned on a level that if we weren't talking about the existence of the Ark having come to rest on Mount Ararat or something like that, there would be a level of scrutiny that would be nowhere near as rigorous to be held to it. It's like, look, here is one thing I can tell each and every one of you, and I can cut a platinum clad guarantee from Tiffany's on its factuality. Nick, if I pinched your mouth and pinched your nose together and held it long enough, you would be dead. And that would be the case for everybody else in this call, every other creature that identifies itself as Homo sapiens sapiens on the planet. Why? Because between what many of us have experienced, sadly, at first generation, and what a great number of us have had given to us at remove from received wisdom, which, by the way, is our species' secret sauce, by the way. Received wisdom and fact from what's gone on, we know this to be fact without controversy. Okay,
It's not. I held a friend of mine's mouth
if
and
you
nose
do it
shut
for
for 5
long
minutes.
enough, they will die.
Nope,
If
you can
you
do it
do
for
it
6
for-
hours with my buddy. He'll be fine.
Oh, you got to be kidding me. Seriously?
No, I'm not. He has a ruptured eardrum, so he can breathe through his ears.
Okay, well, there we go.
And
Okay.
that's not a joke. And that, no, I'm not being silly. I'm not being silly.
Excuse me.
Okay, just let me fucking modify.
Okay,
If
modify
I
away.
shut off all of your avenues to oxygenation,
Mhm.
you will die.
Yeah.
Okay, which is the. But thank you for saving us, Captain. Actually,
Okay.
thank you very much.
So let's just get us slightly back on track, because I have a problem, and I have had a problem with the word evidence anyway, because it's somewhat what's the word I'm looking for? Like so too general. There isn't a good definition which is accurate to the point of what we want to convey. It has several meanings depending on what we wish to convey, and that's very different. Evidence is very different from the word evidentialist, right? Because when we're talking about someone who is a religious evidentialist, right, then they have specific ideas about what evidence is in relation to what a general version of the word evidence could be.
Well, they do until you show them that their evidence is incorrect.
Gus, yeah, hang on. So I want to just draw that distinction first, right? Because I want to be fair to these
I
people.
gave 2 definitions for evidence. Or
You did.
Evidence. But
I'm going
And
somewhere.
you just made up a goddamn word.
I'm just going somewhere, so just give me a second.
I gave the definition for evidentialism.
Yep.
And it uses almost identical of the definition of evidences that I gave.
Yeah. So, like, it depends on your epistemology, is what it comes down to, is where I'm going. But I don't want to say
absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
What I'd like to do is throw it over to Michael, who's just joined us, okay? Because he might have something to say on the philosophical use of the word, as opposed to the colloquial use, as opposed to the theological use. All three have different versions, as far as I'm concerned. Although I'll go with colloquial. It's just me. So anyway, welcome to the show, Michael. Thank you so much for being here. And if you just want to introduce yourself and who you are, what your channel is, all that stuff quickly,
welcome.
and then talk about evidence and evidentialism.
I mean, I have zero idea of what I just walked into, other than Nick is fundamentally wrong, which, you know. I'm
used to that. It's not the first time.
No, I'm Michael Granado, history, philosophy teacher.
Spoken
I
like a true teacher.
yeah, I have no idea what y'all are talking about. Something to do with evidence. Yeah, so I would say, man, I'm gonna sound like a stereotypical philosopher as usual. I mean, I think it largely depends on the context. I think different disciplines have different criteria for evidence. So, evidence in history might look a little different from evidence in physics. Evidence in physics might look a little different from evidence in psychology, so on, as Zizek would say. But yeah, I mean, I do think there has to be some sort of commonly accepted standard for evidence for any of us to have some sort of conversation with each other. That common standard of evidence is, typically speaking, unless we have good reason to doubt it, sensory experience, basic laws and rules of rationality. Yeah, take your pick. I don't know what you wanted me to add to that, but that's
Well, yeah,
We
well,
were
I have a
talking about
question for you, Michael.
evidentialism.
Somebody had a what?
I have a question for you, Mike.
Oh God.
That's right. Get ready. So, knowing that you understand the history of philosophy, the history of psychology, the idea that evidence, like the evidentialist proselytizing or the apologetic, it really is a sham version of scientific evidence, in my opinion, right? Especially the way that Dwayne Gish and Kent Hovind take care of it. My question for you is, because that is so steeped in like physical scientific evidence, there, in my opinion, there came this weird crossroad in the atheist movement where those arguments, once the precept came along, were met with a different form of evidence, which was philosophical arguments. Philosophical arguments weren't really weighted as evidence, in my opinion, or my observation, until like the precept argument kind of came about. Up until then, it was empiricism that kind of ruled the evidentialist definition and criteria of what evidence was. Do you have an opinion about that?
I mean, y'all really. I just mostly came here to listen.
Damn you to hell! You need to be an active participant, and I'm trying to drag you in, kicking and screaming.
I know very little about presuppositionalism, other than like maybe an article or two that I read. So I can't really represent I don't know anything about the history of it. I will say that from what little bit I know about presuppositionalist, I wouldn't even say they use. Well, do we have a presuppositionalist here? I don't.
No,
presuppose
no,
existence.
but we're all steeped in it. We know what
We're all presuppositionalists.
They use a form of philosophical
true.
reasoning, but it's. I think to say that they use philosophical arguments might be given a little too much credit there, because it's also any sort of like actual like logician or epistemologist. Most of what a presuppositionalist says would be foreign to how they think and kind of the common lingo. So to not answer your question.
Okay.
Well, Simos,
I
I know you want to get to Mark, but
I do,
I guess the core of what I was asking was whether or not you would deem philosophical arguments as evidence.
Yeah, I think depending upon the context of what we're talking about. So for example, if Nick and I are having a conversation about what an appropriate moral action is, then I think an appeal to rationalistic argument would be a perfectly acceptable form of evidence.
And
Whereas
that would be a redundant conversation.
Well, an argument isn't evidence. An argument is your attempt to say how the evidence should weigh. The argument itself is not the evidence. The argument is what you do with the evidence to suggest how and why that evidence is either deductively valid or at least to a degree would be persuasive. But that's a different thing.
Okay,
Yeah,
could I
move
just,
on to Mark while I think about this.
if I could just read out the colloquial definition: the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. So that's the kind of philosophical side as far as I'm concerned. And that when we as naturalists use it, we have a complete bias towards this idea of data or sense data, as Russell called it. right? And I think that is something which is where a lot of the evidential arguments start crossing, and we start talking past each other, basically. So it's a crucial point, as far as I'm concerned, not to think of evidence alone as sense data, but also as things like opinions, which is a difficult thing, right? Claims are evidence, as we had a discussion with somebody once about.
So hold on, Simos. Are you saying you'd weight them the same?
No, I don't personally, because I am an empiricist.
Just
Okay.
evidence, yeah, just evidence, but not necessarily. Not all
My
evidence is equal.
epistemology is
Yeah.
different. I'm just saying from
Are you a true empiricist?
I guess.
Oh.
I don't. Yeah, a true empiricist. Oh yeah, good point. I
He's
play
a
guitar.
Scottish empiricist.
I do play
Yeah.
guitar, so there is that. I remember Ronnie was okay as his little blues licks. But anyway, I do want to
Well,
get to
so
Mark
it's,
Reed,
Mark-
because this is what
yeah,
I've been getting to. So we're talking about evidentialism.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we're talking about evidence versus evidentialism. But what does evidentialism mean to you, Mark? And if you wouldn't mind weighing in on that, I would appreciate it.
It depends on the context it's being used. Absolutely, like it can mean many different things. For me, I don't know. I kind of I'm bewildered. Just to throw another wrench, and I'm kind of bewildered at the idea that an evidence is not evident to people. You know, like you can sort of you can basically go, well, I have anecdotal evidence, right? But I can't show anybody or make it evident. I think that the whole idea of the court system is that you go in and you make what evidence do you have. The idea is that it's evident, even if it is. So does anecdotal evidence, and that's sort of what you're saying, your beliefs kind of thing. Precepts are a weird one because they don't even bother with evidence. They're just right up front, and then they basically don't bother with evidence at all. Like they're not, like, psychologically, they're not in a place where they need to prove anything because they're automatically right.
Yeah, it's
So
basically
it's kind of it's kind of a weird one. It's more just dogmatic assertion kind of thing. So it's a weird one whether that's evidence, like somebody claiming that is the truth. Well, it depends if you're taking anecdotal evidence as evidence. So when you're talking about evidentialism with Christians, right? Evidentialism,
Right,
you're really
right,
talking
yeah.
about which way
Christian
they're working.
apologetics.
Yeah, they're working from Bible and sort of revealed revelation, special and general revelation, or whether they're working the other way, like the precepts, which is I'm right first, and then that I don't need evidence for that.
Well, the precepts say that they're right because of revelation, right? But the precepts will turn around and say, how do you know anything unless you've got someone who knows everything that can tell you if you're right or wrong?
No,
right? Oh
no,
yeah, no,
but
that's how precepts work. And then when you're honest and you say, well, no, I can't, I don't profess to be 100% sure about anything. They turn around and say, well, what if there was a God? And then as soon as the honesty inside you says that you can't completely rule out the existence of a God, they simply decide that because you can't rule one out, that means that one must exist, and therefore, and then the next thing you know, they know because their God told them. And by the way, their God told you too. You're just stamping your foot and holding your breath and refusing to accept the existence of the God.
Yeah,
this is how precepts work.
Yeah, no, I'm not really concerned about how they work. I'm really concerned about the structure of what they're saying, and you're mostly right, just a little bit different. That they're presupposing up front that any coherence in any intelligibility at all, you have to have God to be able to show that. So they're not working backwards. They're working from, I'm going to presuppose a God exists and is responsible for any intelligibility in the world. Then sort of doing a affirming the consequent. There's intelligibility in the world, therefore I'm right about God kind of thing. But they are presupposing the God up front, or the God is responsible for something up front kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely.
They sort of
I don't think we're disagreeing as much as you think we are.
Right.
He,
Well, I
he said
mean,
he did say it was a
yeah.
small bit. Michael,
Yeah.
just to ask you, do you know anything of like the history of when evidentialism got called evidentialism, or when it was in vogue? I'm assuming like people like James Ussher or whatever couldn't conceive of the pre-sup argument even, right? Because he's so in depth with like the meaning in the Bible.
So, on the religious front, not really. I mean, I could say, and this is just shooting off the cuff here. Like, don't take everything I say here with a big grain of salt. I mean, what's really weird is like even within early science, rationalistic discourse and argumentation was considered a fundamental part of the scientific method, like all the way up until like the 17th century. Like you have Descartes' discourse on method. He's laying out a fundamentally deductive form of scientific reasoning in which evidence for Descartes might be like logical argumentation. And that's like completely thrown out the window once we get into like the 17th century, like early biologists who like evidence is like hardcore, like what you can actually find, see, and observe, and the rise of museums and categorization and all that other good stuff. But like within natural theology, I mean, natural theology is dominated by a form of evidentialism in the form of like, I'm thinking of like Paley here, all the way up until about the 19th century. So I can't imagine presuppositionalism being much earlier than that.
No, the thing is
But
that
if you're
science.
talking about modern science terms, none of the assertions and sort of logical argumentation would ever come into being as evidence, nor would I presume sort of anecdotal evidence kind of thing. I think we would determine, hey, just sort of getting what somebody else says isn't evidence in any kind of scientific way.
Well, the scientific method was slowly honed, very slowly honed, in places that were otherwise places of religion. It's just that the problem started when the scientific method started creating answers that were antithetical to what the scriptures taught. That's when all of a sudden there began to be a schism between science and faith. And that's when you stop seeing monks being the primary performers of scientific inquiry, and you started seeing it slowly being pushed out into the secular world, with the understanding that everybody was a Christian, but there are slider bars of how Christian we are, right? Like everybody goes to church because it's expected that you go to church if you live in a Christian society, especially one in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. You run into serious trouble if you want to live in a faith-based community and not be of that faith. But there's a difference between people who have to work for a living and on Sundays they do some experiments in their chosen field of interest, and people like Gregor Mendel, who is a monk, who all he has to do is figure out how plants work and worship God. But like I said, it didn't start becoming a problem until it began, answer after answer after answer seemed to slowly push God back.
I don't want to nitpick, and this really isn't the place for nitpicking. But
for fuck's sake! You study philosophy. I have never in my life heard a philosopher with a straight face say, "I don't want to nitpick." Oh, for fuck's sake!
It's a casual conversation. I would just say, Gus, like there are some points.
So please.
There are some points that you made that I would generally agree with, but I want to avoid what historians call the conflict thesis, which is that there's some sort of inherent disagreement between science and religion. That's been thoroughly debunked and rejected for about the past 50 years.
Really?
In historical circles.
So when religion says that God puts babies inside of women by hand wavium, and science says actually we have kind of the roadmap of precisely how it happens, almost down to the DNA level, and faith says nuh-uh, and because there are still faiths that say nuh-uh, I'm not sure that there's not a conflict there.
No, there can be conflict, and historically there has been conflict, but I just want to caution a little bit about this narrative that faith claims were made and then science slowly, like one by one, kind of debunked or went against those faith claims, and that this is the reason why we have like a fundamental disagreement between science and religion. I would actually point to the rise of humanism and issues regarding hermeneutics and interpretation. I think played a much more significant, theologically speaking, role in what we see with like the Protestant Reformation and the fundamental changes that took place with regard to interpretation.
Well, perhaps amongst the theologists themselves, but out here in the fields where we fight for our meals, what was slowly peeling away man's faith on a day by day basis, particularly amongst the so-called learned classes, was the fact that every time we lifted a rock marked mystery of the universe, we looked underneath it expecting to find God there sipping a mojito, and he wasn't. It was just another fact. It was another, if you hit this lever, this biscuit will happen, right? Which is what faith teaches directly against. Faith teaches, smacketh not the levers, for thou art guaranteed no biscuits, and shut up also, right? So, I mean, yeah.
I mean, in terms of the common everyday person, though, I don't really see that pushback happening really until about Darwin. That's 19th century.
Sure, but I was very careful to say the so-called learned classes, right? I mean, look there are people today, the average person, the whatever the modern equivalent is of the turnip farming serf, who is no more grounded one way or the other on faith and or science than they were back in the day when they were digging up mud outside the Lord's castle. But 'twas ever thus.
Yeah, I don't want to dominate the conversation
Xbox.
here. But...
Oh, Mark actually was also getting in there.
I don't know. I think that there's always been atheists around. I mean, we've sort of switched from what is evidence to something completely different. But hell, I'll tangent. That's fine. I think that there's always been an undercurrent of it, sure. But yeah, I'd have to agree with Michael that Darwin is what really, really rocked the boat.
So nobody remembers Copernicus or Galileo?
In terms of the common everyday person, I would challenge you to find like single like public outcry against Copernicus.
I have relinquished the common everyday person isn't really exactly who we're talking about.
Somebody outside of academia responding to Copernicus, the only people that had objections to Copernicus were like astronomers, right? It wasn't like this public backlash, oh, we've lost our place in the cosmos sort of thing like you see with Darwin. That didn't really happen with Copernicus.
Galileo, you mean?
Yeah,
Copernicus,
there's
Galileo.
A resurgence of Chalmers here recently.
Well, I think that the double-edged sword here is sort of the printing press and better means of communication for the common man kind of thing, especially with the advent of the internet, where you can share sort of masses of papers with very little effort. I think that has been given rise to the idea that because if the common people don't know about these discoveries, it's kind of pointless. And that was the whole point about Darwin. It was a massively printed book kind of thing. So I think the printing press was, where the Bible got really, up and going. But it also was a double-edged sword for the Christians because it also meant that scientific information was shared around a lot more easily.
Literacy has definitely been an excellent tool for,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Pushing away the mysteries of the universe. And worse yet is when the Catholic Church decided that we normal squishy people would be allowed to read the Bible in some language other than Latin. They opened up a box of friggin' worms there too.
Wasn't that the King James that did that?
Ah, good old King James.
Yeah. Because that all came along because it's like we hate the Catholics, so we're going to try to push them out so that we'll have an English. There was it was Henry VIII basically. How dare the Pope tell me I'm not allowed to annul my wife because I fancy someone else? I know, I'll create my own religion, a Church of England. And over the next sort of couple of centuries, it's like pushing the Catholics out, so that we'll have the Common Book of Prayer, which is English prayers for English people. It's basically Britain first, America first, etc.
Make England great again.
Yeah. So, but and then King James Bible was like, no, we want to be normal people to be able to read the Bible, and then people were able to read the Bible. Wait a second. I had a hilarious conversation with the street preacher somewhat recently, late last year, I suppose, and I will sometimes talk to the street preachers, but I'll go after the "you better do what my God says or else" type ones. So I ended up hammering him on the resurrection account. Like, which one's true? How many angels were in the tomb? Was it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, or none? And I sort of go through the whole thing. And it came to a point that I was basically, he knew that he probably knew I knew the Bible read better than he did, which is always upsetting for them. And so, and he was letting me use he had an amplifier and a microphone, and he was letting me hold the microphone and say something and hand it back, and he would say something, and it was an interesting conversation. But it came to a point where I painted him into a corner, and he had to become dishonest. He had to, that's when the microphone, I wasn't allowed to hold the microphone anymore, and he stuck it right up to his nose and talked louder. And whenever I talked, he talked. He might as well have stuck his fingers in his ears, closed his eyes, and gone la 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 la. And I knew at that point, and he knew that I'd beaten him on his own belief system.
Absolutely.
I just want this last bit. Okay. I walked down the street, and there's another street preacher, and he was just like shouting to people. He was saying, "I love Jesus, Jesus loves me, and this makes me happy, and this was why." And I had no argument against that, because he was just going on something that made him happy, and that worked for him, and that's great. But when you do "you better believe what I believe or else," no, I'll come after you for that.
Absolutely.
With their evidence.
I've actually. I had something I was going to say there, but unfortunately that went Xbox. Over to you.
Oh, you can go if you want.
Well,
I just Nick has to leave here in a minute, so I just wanted
I got a little more time. The family is watching. We've been catching up on shows that everybody watched at a time, and are it's like I remember people would tell me about Lost, and like, did you watch the latest episode of Lost? No, I've been watching Dora the Explorer because I have kids.
Oh, fantastic!
So they're catching up on Stranger Things. They just finished season 1 a while back. Now it's the long weekend, so I have a little time, and I haven't gotten into Stranger Things. We've got things we all watch together. We just finished watching Firefly, and I actually love that. I was like, oh my god! So.
Oh yeah, I have never seen that, and someone told me to get it the other day, so I'm going to start watching that this next week.
Yeah, good show.
Have you seen the Dora the Explorer finds Kant? Have you seen that episode?
No, I haven't. I did not. There is a great College Rules. Everybody should see this. If you've ever seen Dora, you should see this. College Rules did an ad for a fictitious Dora movie, and it's Dora the Explorer, and it's like all set in real world, but she encounters map, and she's like, I'm the map. And she grabs his head, slams it into the table. Cut the crap, map! Now you're going to tell me what I want to know. It's like, whoa! That was.
I've actually seen that. It's pretty funny.
It was awesome. It was awesome.
So you're saying she confused the map for the location or something, or the place?
Yeah.
The map for the place, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I was just going to say.
Yeah, we have to remember
about making Britain great. I've got one word: Yorkshire tea.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm finished
Nick,
now.
you were making you were talking about certainty earlier, and it seemed like I don't think you think this, but you were making statements as if you think you need like epistemic certitude for things, or just a more layman's just certainty for knowing things in everyday life.
Well, to claim knowledge, I think you do, at least if you're going to claim knowledge. And as I said I mean, it depends on what you call. I mean, if by truth or just say to know something, there's the capital T or capital K for knowledge. I think it's worth pretending they exist. I think the whole reason we've had science and people have gone out and said, let's try to get things better, was actually an assumption that there was a final goal we could reach. I don't think anyone was sitting there going, well, it's the journey that matters. The people said, we can find the truth. I'm not sure we can, but I hope we keep trying. I think the reality is you only have so many seconds in your life, and you cannot have this ultimately high bar for everything. You wouldn't be able to get up in the morning and put your keys in the car and start. So we have to take a whole bunch of shortcuts. The human brain is great at this. We are geared for efficiency, not for accuracy, and that's how we've managed to succeed. But I think in anything that's important, you have to have the bar go up higher, and you have to be prepared to have it go up higher if you have legit questions to legit questions or legit claims of illegitimacy towards specific beliefs. You have to sit there and say, okay, I don't want to take the time to sit down and do this. I'd rather go to Starbucks, but it has value, so that's what I'm going to do. And even that is its own claim. I mean, it's almost an infinite regress of, well, how do you know that it's really worth thinking a little extra about X, Y, and Z claim? And part of that is experience and trying judgment calls,
Well,
What's weird to hear William Lane Craig say lower the bar, because I kind of agree with you. Like, if you're the greater the claim, the higher your bar on, or the more significant the claim, the higher the bar on your epistemic sort of justification should be. But it's really weird to hear William Lane Craig go, well, if your epistemology doesn't reach it, then just lower the bar.
Just lower the bar, he's
right. It was crazy. But I think that I think that with knowledge claims, you sort of go, well, I know this to be true, but I think that's sort of so people
Here,
sort of
let
say,
me grab that, Mark.
Yeah, go.
Let me grab you on the exactly what you're saying, because I want to try to dissuade Nick a little bit from thinking that you need to know something with such certainty as if you're putting it as bars, as that highest bar is with philosophically, when you're talking about JTB, one, knowledge is debated hotly in philosophy of what it means for one, but if you go with JTB and you have a justification for your belief, that truth component in there, it's not something that actually has to be known. It just has to be actually true. You don't have to know that it's actually true for it to be knowledge. It just has to happen to be true for it to be knowledge. And there's not always a way to know that it's true.
So you're saying, I think what you're doing is bifurcating knowledge with that which you believe is true. So if something is true, but you do not know that it's true, and you have not, let me see. I think I'm having a hard time parsing this. So if you have something that you believe is true, and you have, are you suggesting that you don't need to reach a certain? Okay, let's assume that you have not justified a belief, but that belief is true nonetheless. What would you say about that belief?
Without being justified in the belief.
So you have a belief, you have failed to justify it, but it nonetheless happens to be true. So I say, well, I happen to think X, Y, and Z. I have no evidence for X, Y, and Z, and then just based on a long shot, X, Y, and Z happens to be true, despite the fact that I am unable to justify it.
Under JTB, then it wouldn't be knowledge, just because you're missing the justification point there.
Okay.
But you can have other justifications of the belief other than truth.
Well,
right?
I think
knowledge that your turns out to actually be wrong, which is ends up being not knowledge in the end.
Right. And that's what I was going to say. Like, we kind of retcon it, don't we? We sort of make these knowledge claims and sort of go, okay, well, that's knowledge that I have. And when you find out you're inevitably wrong, as I do, you sort of go, well, I've never had knowledge all that time. It's like a retconning process that you go, okay, well, all that time I believed I had knowledge. But then we're getting into like real sort of meta by going, how did you know you knew?
Yeah, you get into the KK problem if you go that way, which is that you know.
But I agree with all that, so I'm not sure where the point of contention would be.
Oh, I was just trying to dissuade you from having to actually know that it's true part of it, so that you don't have to have that level of certainty necessarily for anything. You can have just reasonably certain about things, options like that.
And you'd have to. You'd have to, because I've already ceded that there's only degrees of certainty, and you cannot have 100% certainty about any fact. So I think already necessarily that would entail what you've just said.
Right. And that's the thing I was telling you I was going to push back on with in Discord kind of deal. But it's not something that really is gonna matter to what you're saying. But there is. I'll give you the just for instance, go one step past what Descartes says. I think, therefore I am. Right, because you can't really justify the I exists in that statement.
In my example, I doubt, therefore I might be.
No, I think therefore reality, something exists.
Yeah,
well, he never said any of those things, but yeah.
Right, but you can still be there are epistemologies that can wreck it, but like existence, for instance, existence is happening, right? It's the impossibility of the contrary. If it weren't, if existence weren't here, you wouldn't be experiencing anything to argue it back, right? Like it would be nothing.
Well, it depends on how you define existence. If you would include in that, for example, a computer simulation, because such a computer simulation would exist, and I'm sure you know simulation theory.
Exists.
So yeah, something I think is a much more defensible position.
What I usually use is experience, because that's something that's undeniable is usually the word I use.
I'm more honing in onto myself because it's what I directly experience, because I can't say experiences or something like that. So usually I just sort of say thoughts, therefore ultimately a reality.
Well, let me put it to you this way. I don't actually agree, but I don't think it matters. So let me put it to you this way.
Yeah.
I cannot conceive of a way in which it could be false, but that's an argument from ignorance. So the question is, do I think that it is in fact possible that none of us exist, including myself? Yes, I think that's actually possible, even though I can't conceive of how that would be, because there would be an argument from ignorance to say that would necessitate that it's not possible. Having said that, because all the coins of the realm cannot be counterfeit, if everything is fake, then everything is true. There is no difference between the two. Therefore, it doesn't matter if that's the case. If that were the case, whatever this is so identical to what I think it is, at least my perception is, and the inability to distinguish them so perfect, it doesn't matter. So while I would disagree with that statement that you made, that's necessarily the case, I think it has absolutely no bearing on how we operate in reality or making arguments going forward.
Right. Yeah, see, I wanted to put the experience out there and you can't deny the contrary, but I didn't want to get like deep into it, like, because you can't say, is it happening to something? Is it like you could deny that, like you can doubt that too, and you can doubt but even if we're in a simulation, you're absolutely right. We live as we live, as
doesn't matter.
Different. Right.
Point.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of does matter. It kind of does. I mean, sort of. So the idea that a simulation can't be broken out of I think that's a sort of assumption that I wouldn't make. I mean, don't get me wrong, at the moment, if we are in a simulation, there's no way to get evidence of that and we're back to evidence, because everything you gather is from the simulation. But I would hesitate to say that it doesn't matter over,
Let me make
I think it
my
still
argument.
does matter.
Let me make my argument as to why.
Me, I guess.
Well, here's why. I don't think that's. I'm sorry, Laura. Please go.
It's not just that. The fact that we can make, even if a simulation was true, we'd still use the same methodology to be able to reach a conclusion.
So I think exactly, and I think it doesn't matter for the sake of what we're discussing in this precise argument. It matters for many other things, because maybe you could break out of it, maybe you could find a way. But for this argument, the argument that's made is what's called the evil genius argument, which is the argument. It started. I forget who first posited it, but there's a being which is Descartes, thank you. So Descartes' evil genius argument, being which is no less intelligent than God, has this simulation going, and we are all in it, but we cannot distinguish between normal reality and that. If that were true, then the counter to that is what's called coins of the realm. All the coins of the realm cannot be counterfeit. So for that particular argument, in every iteration of we do not exist, we just think we do, for every iteration of that kind of argument, it is absolutely irrelevant which side you land on going forward, because all the coins of the realm cannot be counterfeit. If, however, we're talking about, I wonder if we could prove that, well, now you're no longer assuming that we are being tricked. You're no longer asking, do we exist? You're saying maybe we do exist in the simulation, so how could we determine it? That's another set of questions. And under that set, yes, I agree with you, it matters very much, but I don't think that's relevant to the particular argument that we're having here. Or not argument we're having, sorry, argument that is being made.
I do have an amusing thought, which is Descartes, wrote in French. Descartes, a Frenchman, used Latin to give us a thought, to convey an idea to people. I find that amusing. French guy uses Latin to speak to us.
Yeah.
Is that de-evolution or something? Have we found it at last? De-evolution. We found it. Yeah, but see, it occurs to me like that when you say that there's a demon that's got all the powers of an evil god. Yeah, I mean, that's still something, right? So a reality still exists. And I'm not in any way suggesting that we know how to, like, this is a simulation by an evil god. There's no way we can possibly access that. But would that still matter to me if it wasn't evil god? I mean, I realize.
Sorry. Would it still matter you if what? I didn't catch the word. You said if or if
that
not.
Was the case?
Okay.
I forget what I said, but yeah, if it's the case, would that still matter to me personally? Yes. If you, I think that you're sort of appealing to a certain type of pragmatism, to sort of say, hey, it doesn't matter because I can't. I have no way to investigate it, so I'm going to put it over here and forget about it, kind of thing. And I totally get that. But I think that it would matter in sort of a more universal sense. Like if we're going out to explore the universe, if it's just a simulation, I think that does matter. That is something that is significant.
So let me ask you a question, because now I'm curious. I'm curious. Okay, so all the coins of the realm cannot be counterfeit. So the argument here is, let's say we discover tomorrow that every dollar bill ever printed by the U.S. Treasury was in fact printed by a counterfeiter. And what this counterfeiter did was they made a fake Treasury building. They faked emails with the government saying, oh, we're the Treasury. There really was no Treasury, and the U.S. thought there was, but there wasn't. And every single bill ever made was counterfeited by this group of counterfeiters. They're the only ones who have made counterfeited this currency. They've done it so every single coin that is, or every coin, every bill, everything that's been made has always been counterfeit, and presumably always will be. Now what? And the argument is, well, now nothing. Now you keep going because it hasn't actually changed anything. I had a friend of mine come calling me up, freaking out, like, oh my God, I just realized something. I was like, what? I just heard that everything that I bought at the grocery store has 1,000 times more calories than I thought it did. I was like, what do you mean? Like, it's capital C calories. That's different. It's kilocalories. Don't you understand? I've been having 1,000 times more calories. Yeah, but you've been doing that your whole. It's just okay. The calorie means something different than you thought. It always had. It hasn't changed a thing. So let's assume that you are in fact in a machine right now that is simulating everything, a matrix. So absolutely everything that you could ever do is a simulated version of reality. If there is no way to, yeah, well, and that's what what is it? Not modern monetary. That's what Austrian economics would tell you is basically happening anyway when you have a Federal Reserve. Yeah, exactly. I'm aware. It's great we have an economist in the room. So let's say absolutely everything you could ever do is being simulated to this thing, and you have absolutely no way of figuring it out. Why would you care about the difference? And for me, it falls along the lines of, well, my life would have more meaning if I was exploring a real universe and real laws instead of ones made up for me. And I guess I kind of feel that way too, except then what would I mean in this? On what grounds would I say one thing has more value than another? So what are your thoughts on that?
That's a little much, Nick.
Yeah, fair.
I don't know.
I'm going to fill this gap with just the imagination.
Yeah, please.
So all of a sudden, I just imagine a new version of the Matrix where everybody, the people who take the pill are the sovereign citizens.
I think that's already happened.
Yeah.
I'll just clarify real quick to Xbox. Type it in the chat just because I can't type all of this. It'd be a lot easier for me just to say it. So you were asking about like, well, how do you know if you were living in a simulation? So I just want to quickly call a distinction between the arguments that the evil God, the evil genius, however you want to phrase that. So Descartes is using that as a way to talk about the philosophical position.
Chris, my name is Chris.
Skepticism. Oh yeah, sorry. Chris is using that to talk about a way to talk about a position called global skepticism, which is like, how do you know anything? And so the purpose of Descartes presenting this is to show that we can have certain knowledge about certain types of things. That's different from the simulation hypothesis, a la Nick Bostrom more recently, and supported by people who don't understand it, like Elon Musk. But the simulation argument is a statement about reality, or at least our perceived reality, which, if true, there would be evidence for, just in the same way that you can tell if something's a video game by, I know nothing about technology or coding, but that's the sort of thing. That's different from the evil God. So in Descartes' evil God argument, the God is so powerful that the God can change your memories, right?
Right.
So in that case, there may not be evidence of it. But for the simulation hypothesis, if the simulation hypothesis is true, it's a statement about reality or our perceived reality. So there would be ways to know whether or not we are living in a simulation.
Yeah,
and presumably this God is omnipotent, because like there is literally, if it's omnipotent, there's literally no way to escape that power, right, Nick? That's
why the version that I use is the evil genius argument for precisely that reason. And I think that's why because people do conflate the two, and I think Michael put it much better than I did on that conflation, and that's precisely the problem.
Less time as well.
Yeah, well, that's why I don't like having him talk, is because I'd much rather take five
really
times longer. And
thank you. It really got me thinking, man. Honestly, that's interesting. Sorry, Xbox, go ahead, mate.
I was just quickly gonna tell Michael that I get what you were saying. I could conceive of having a powerful or a magnifying glass or whatever, and being able to see the pixels in the makeup of the universe or whatever, things like that. Like I could see situations where a simulation theory would would give rise to evidences.
Well, I would like to point out my philosophy professor, one of the things he always said was absolutely never, never use a small word when a diminutive one will do. But okay, I got Michael's
Wow.
laugh.
That was, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael, pretending to find it funny.
I was going to ask just quickly, what is the simulation argument an argument against in Nick Bostrom's case?
Oh God. So I just
I'm thinking it's solipsism more than theism, but
yeah. So in Bostrom's case, it's really weird. And I actually I interviewed a philosopher recently that actually believes this. So it's not like I guess I shouldn't call it weird. I don't mean that in a negative way. Weird, interesting, but it's not an argument. It's not like Descartes in that Descartes' argument is more so of a thought experiment. Descartes doesn't literally believe that there's an evil God controlling all of our memories and creating reality at every turn. But the simulation argument is a statement about reality, that reality, or what we perceive of as realities, in fact, a simulation.
Could be simulation. Right? I don't think it would say is.
Probability
could be.
Well, it was probably it was far more. It was far more likely that it's a simulation than not.
Bostrom's version is probability.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you.
No, you're good.
Right. So that's supposed to prove that we've got every reason to believe in solipsism, or
well, it wouldn't be solipsist if the simulation hypothesis is correct.
Okay.
It's still not solipsism because there's still the possibility there is that there's somebody that's plugged you into the system. So there's other people, other minds. Now in some versions, I had this conversation with Marcus Arvian recently, who thinks that it's not a probability that and I can't do this justice, but according to him, what makes most sense of the laws of physics is that we're in a simulation.
Yeah.
So he completely does away with the ancestor
yeah.
simulation and says that no, this is the best explanation, best scientific explanation of reality.
I would imagine if we were in a physics simulator, there'd be a lot more janky stuff happening. You know, I've been in physics simulators and stuff flying into the air, and Anyway, yeah, but I think that yeah, so I think I would argue also there's another possibility for simulation theory, and that's that none of us exist, and it's just a partitioned section of one thing. That we are, I guess I would describe it, if you want to use game jargon, as we're all NPCs, basically. Which I hate that term applied to people, but for the so apart from there's other people that exist that have plugged this in. Maybe that none of us exist is another way to go.
So maybe Michael can tell me which one this is. So I think this is the original iteration, but it may have been the second. So the idea, and it was just a thought experiment, was what it was. It wasn't trying to prove or disprove anything, just a thought experiment to make people uncomfortable, which is the goal of every philosopher. So basically what he said was, okay, can we agree that it is very likely that in the near future we will have the ability computers will be strong enough that we will have the ability to create simulations and actually simulate a human consciousness or even a whole reality. If you believe that that is likely, then the next question is, do you believe that it is likely we will in fact do that and run many simulations to try to test things, and that anything within these simulations could only operate if they thought it was real? Well, that seems probably likely. Okay, so now what is the likelihood that we are one of those simulations versus reality itself? And if you grant the first two, it's very hard not to grant the third one, that we're probably not in reality.
Well, is it though? Because we don't have any simulations which accurately can do that.
Which is why I said if you grant the first two, you don't have to grant them. But
fair point. But it sounds very similar to the same argument when I hear it from like possibility. Right? If a God exists in a possible world, he exists in this world.
Yeah, well,
but that's based upon conceivability or something like that. It's called.
Yeah, but that's based upon the power or the omnipotence of God, sure. Because a God that exists in all world is more powerful than one that doesn't exist in all world. So it's I dislike that argument completely.
Okay, well, let me try another example then. I appreciate your finickiness here, Mark, because you are absolutely right. It's not the best example. So how about the example from or for dualism, saying that minds can conceive, and that's something which can't be reduced, and therefore a mind must have created everything.
Minds conceive. What do you mean by conceive?
Well, they have they like the argument for, well, I don't even know what it's called. So the argument for agency, for God's agency, is normally how I hear it. Like minds exist, minds create. Therefore, the creation exists. Therefore, there was a mind that created it. Kind of an argument.
Yeah, but the problem
which is similar in the same sense that we have lots of examples of minds creating. Right? We have lots of examples of simulators, right? But they're taking that extra step and saying, well, these simulators could create, and likewise,
the problem
they're
is
saying
it's
the mind
not
could
just
exist
minds
disembodied.
It's not just minds that create. That's the problem. Like, you also have, depending on how you're using the word create, you could say that snowflakes sort of have a pattern that's been created, but that's been created by the natural laws of physics.
Right. You can have teleonomic creation.
But I think Simos is trying to say that that's the same fault. So I think Simos is trying to compare. I don't think Simos is trying to say it's a good argument. I think Simos is saying it's a bad argument in the same way that this is.
In the same way, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, can I give Bostrom's original argument though? Bostrom has said what Nick has said before. I've seen him say it, but his original argument that he published is one of the following three statements are true. The first statement is the human species is very likely to go extinct before reaching a post-human stage. The second statement is any post-human civilization is extremely unlikely to run a significant number of simulations of their evolutionary history or variations thereof. And the third statement is we are most certainly living in a computer simulation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so here's my, and this is where I do bring it back to the evil genius, because if such a simulation were to be credible and to work, everything inside it would have to be unaware and have to be unable to deduce that it was a simulation. So the simulation would have to be sufficiently enough advanced that everything inside it being simulated could have whatever you deem consciousness to be, and yet not deduce that it was a simulation. Ergo, when you make that additional assumption, which he never said, but I think is necessarily entailed by his argument in order for it to work, then necessarily you do take that back to the evil genius argument, because it's structured the same way. You just have to take that extra step. But that is not, I think, something that he's argued. I just think it's entailed by the argument.
Well, and plus it raises to me, like, why are they running a simulation? Like, what's the point?
Oh, but we do that. We do that with weather, right? I mean, we run simulations, so we take weather, and the more we can learn about weather, and the more we can simulate patterns, the more we can figure out what's like, how we like. We have, the best simulation I've ever seen is the pen simulation, when you take out on a map and you say, I know NOAA says that a hurricane isn't going to hit Texas, but here it is because my name's Donald Trump, and I can just, sorry, I'm still bitter. But at any rate, we do. Yeah, we do simulations so that we can figure out what the likelihood is of a certain kind, and simulations tell us a great deal, and that's also how so I think simulations are pretty important, and we certainly do it all the time. Why wouldn't we do it if we could simulate human consciousness and then test ethically, presumably, what would human beings do under conditions X, Y, and Z? But that assumes that we could simulate it accurately.
But that also sort of supports the we don't exist sort of premises. That supports that one, rather than, we've been plugged in some way hypothesis. Because why would you plug in humans if you could do a simulation of reality? Why wouldn't you just simulate the organisms as well?
But again, they would have to, in essence, believe they exist, whatever they means in this sense. So that's how and why. In order for that to work, you'd have to make that final step, and if you do, I think you're right back to the evil genius argument, and then you're back to the coins of the realm cannot be counterfeit. If we're unable to tell, which is the only way that argument could work, is if it was unable to tell, then it doesn't matter.
we're kind of also getting into the weeds here, Mark. But to that point,
now we're getting into the weeds. Really?
I mean,
The weeds
we're
are
already
3
there.
miles
Really,
back.
Michael?
I'm sorry.
I've been wading through weeds for half an hour now, and you're like, oh yeah, we're getting to the weeds. Now's the
Right.
weeds, really?
Well,
And I apologize.
We're up
for
to here
starting
on the
that.
weeds.
oh,
Yeah, I know,
it's a
right?
great conversation.
That
Well,
was a
I think
mistake on
there's-
my part.
There's different types of simulation arguments. I don't want to conflate all these into one. So Bostrom's kind of like Descartes, as Nick was saying, I think would be more of a thought experiment. And then there's the argument Marcus Arvian puts forward, which is that no, like this is actual reality. And there are some philosophers who buy into that. And their response to part of that question, Mark, and to Simos's point earlier about solipsism, there are philosophers who question whether or not computers or machines would be able to generate consciousness, whether it be the same sort of consciousness that we experience. And so the argument that we're all not just part of my simulation or your simulation would be that we're all conscious, and that consciousness can't be replicated by a machine. So that would indicate that we're all plug, whatever that means, plugged in, or there's some sort of common simulation that we're part of.
I have to grant that we couldn't replicate consciousness, though, and that sounds more like a dualism thing than a sort of materialist thing. And I got to dash. I'm so sorry, but it's been great. Thanks, Nick and Michael and Simos and Xbox.
Thank you very much for coming on.
That was great, Mark. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, and take care, everybody.
And before you go, we're intending to have the same session again, probably next week, but maybe on the Saturday instead of the Sunday.
Okay, sure.
Hopefully you can make that. You've been a great
that's
contributor,
Monday
as
for
always.
me, but that's then Sunday and not Saturday. Anyway,
no,
I'll try.
The day before I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know I've got a few debates coming up, so I have to see where my schedule's going. I'm really eager to get the debates that I can. But absolutely, if I can make it, send it over. I apologize about coming late. I saw your thing and thought it was the last week's one. I'm like, why are you repeating it? Look, here's a tip. Change your thumbnails so they're unique. It really helps, right? Unique thumbnails really help.
I will change next week's thumbnail, I promise. I've already got a
Look,
great
it's just
idea
a suggestion.
I've already got a great idea for it, Mark. Thank you.
Oh boy, I can't wait to see it. Okay, I think I get.
All right, take
I'm
care.
so glad you said it, not me.
Cheers.
It's funny that Nick mentioned snowflakes, and it just sort of a silly solipsism went in through my head when he mentioned it. And the solipsism is basically, premise one: God creates snowflakes. Premise two: Twitter causes the majority of snowflakes. Conclusion: therefore, Elon Musk is God.
That took a dark turn. I was not seeing that one.
I have an adverse reaction to that conclusion, so
Yeah.
emotionally I can't accept it.
So do I, and I made up the joke.
I don't even think Twitter is an English word.
Oh dear Lord.
Well, that's what actually Elon Musk is who I heard make the argument that we
That
would
he's
never
God?
reach the phase that, that we would never reach the phase to create synthetic human consciousness.
I think that's
really
pretty silly.
This sounds like a really bad excuse for him to have already failed at creating a working robot, and it'll be here by next year.
Carl Sagan calculated this, and he calculated this a while back. I don't know what it is. I'd like to know. I'd like someone to figure it out in modern terms. But Carl Sagan, in Dragons of Eden, wrote that if we were so if you took every neuron in the human brain as either fired or unfired, you have more combinations of fired and unfired in the human brain than there are elementary particles in the universe. That's quite a lot of combinations. And obviously, if you know anything about the makeup of, it's not that random, right? They fire in patterns and yada, yada, yada. But in order to get a computer that could have as many bits and make as many decisions as a human brain, it would need to have the size of Texas and the height of the Empire State Building. We have obviously gotten nowhere near something even today that can make that many decisions, especially not without so much heat that it just melts and destroys itself. Now, quantum computing offers the possibility of something like this, and that would be great. But I don't see a reason why, if we were able to create a neural architecture that operates not like a linear chip, but like an actual neural, multiple smaller decisions instead of single linear longer ones. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't be able to build a computer that could be as conscious as we are. Now, what consciousness means, we'll get into all that if that's up. But that could be as we are, and not in a Turing sense either. I mean, there's also the pragmatic view, which is, well, if you can't tell the difference, which is what I've been arguing the whole time, I know. But I not only can you not tell the difference, I think if it can make all the calculations we can, and if it learns in roughly the same way that we do, and you bring it up and raise it and do all of it, it's going to be as smart as we are. So
the uncanny valley, and then
why does that make me feel
depressed? Mirrors.
Yeah, why does
What's
that make me
Sorry, what?
I've come across a lot of people who aren't as smart as a computer.
Oh, believe me, I know people who couldn't pass a Turing test. So I mean,
I've kind of heard of chimps that can. You know what I mean? Just saying. And there's quite a leeway as to what consciousness is, right? And the number of neurons required to achieve even a basic level. But I think again, it's the same thing as evidence, right? It's got this slippery slope kind of fallacy going on here, where you go. We mean generally when we talk about consciousness, we have in our minds the idea of like consciousness being something that can be aware of itself, right? So that's kind of like the minimum line that we mean, whereas it probably isn't that. Evolutionary speaking, it seems that the brain is layered like an onion rather than cored like an apple. So the analogy between computers and I think, or what we think of as a computer as having a processing core, right? Which is not really true anymore and hasn't been for a long, long time, since probably Turing, since the semiconductor at least anyway. That idea seems to me where the future lies. And of course, the step that they're trying to take is to get to quantum computing, whatever that means. Never worked it out myself. But whatever that means, and maybe then, we're talking about how the brain works. That's been another thing in terms of evidentialism, people finding out that maybe quantum mechanics is something to do with how the brain works. I don't know if anybody is aware of that or has views on that.
Well, it's interesting how Nick said. It's interesting how Nick said, like, it would have to be the size of Texas and, that kind of thing. And it's like, well, if you think about it, just in a little over our lifetime, a computer has gone for something made out with valves that would take up an entire room and wouldn't be that good, to something that is incredibly complicated today.
Well, and I mean, so quantum computing basically, so everybody knows a computer is and it's been a while since I've looked at it, but everybody knows that a computer is 0 and 1s. And with quantum computing, instead of passing on the state of a what is it, like a magnet that's either on or off. They started as magnets. Now it doesn't use solid core magnets anymore, but it's still the same principle. It's either on or off. Exactly. What you can, well, it's not just the up and down spin, but it's, what level of the, is it in a Q orbit or in a P orbit and all of these other things. So all of a sudden you end up with, instead of 1s and 0s, and each bit being a 1 and 0, you have a quantum bit, which is essentially the same size of packaging material, but instead of only holding either a 0 or a 1, which is just a piece of information in 2 states, it can hold, I forget like how many states, but it's a huge number of states, and they can pass by much quicker and be changed much quicker, presumably, theoretically, if it happens. So it's not just, so far we've just had quantitative changes in computers. They've gotten faster and more powerful. This would be a qualitative change where the fundamental architecture would no longer be zeros and ones, and it would be greater than an exponential in it would be greater than an exponential increase in the power of it would be several orders of magnitude higher at just the first iteration.
Mm.
And
Presumably,
right, Hillary, it would be qubits.
Yeah, it's a qubit.
And you think of, we've got fiber optics as well, so even that was an upgrade from what we had before, right?
And you'd be changing the state instantly.
That was
so
our
it's
limit
faster,
before, yeah. So even that's been surpassed kind of by the, what is it? Is it the entanglement that's able to pass that, or?
There's an idea that you can go. Well, first of all, the idea is you could actually go faster than the speed of light by having two entangled bits, and if you change one, the other one instantly changes no matter where it is. Now, in theory, that seems to be true, but to the best of my knowledge, they've never gotten entangled. I think I read once that they got an entangled bit it's on a couple thousand miles apart, but I'm not sure that was accurate. So I don't know what the status of that is, but if you could, then yes, presumably you could violate the speed of light information barrier. I don't know enough about it. I know quantum entanglement, at a minimum, you should be able to move much faster than electricity moves through a medium.
Yeah, I don't know much about it. I just know that what I've heard and what Dr. YouTube's given me.
Just to bring this back, so this is just giving weight to the idea that we could be in a simulation.
Yeah.
I know we're down a heavy rabbit hole right now. Thank you for looking up at me, Nick. But no, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. But just to say, we could be in a similar. In which case, what is even evidence? Evidence would just be another pixel, right? There we go. There we go. Xbox, over to you.
Yeah, it's up to the guest and you. I'm enjoying talking either way, off air, on air. It's fine how we finished it off.
Yeah, no, it's cool. You just tell me what you want to do. If you want to finish it there, we've done 2 hours, so that's a very good conversation, I feel. And if there's anything else, has anybody got anything they want to say? Finish up with any last statements or anything at all?
Good to see you all again.
I was going to tell my solipsism joke, but I think I'll save it. I think most of the panel here has already heard it, so I know Michael's heard it. But
of course we've heard it.
Well, yeah, I told it, right? So of course you've heard
it. You thought of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's fine. Thank you, Michael, for being on. We really appreciate it. Laura, it's great to see you again. I hope you're doing well.
I am. I'm doing well. Actually, next month is my second anniversary of HRT, so that's
congratulations.
Awesome.
I took 2.5 years to get it as well, and that was and that's only because I was lucky. If I lived 5 miles further towards the east, I would have got my first assessment around about now. So 4 years later.
God bless the king. Right, so random, I know, but I'm thinking of the NHS, really. God bless the NHS.
Well, not if you're trans.
Well, it's how it works, isn't it? I mean, it's so vague. It's so so unreliable in some
I could go on for a long time about how awful the NHS is for trans people.
Okay. Sorry to say that. Sorry to bring up the subject then.
No, it's fine.
Right at the end.
It is what it is.
Well done, Simos. Things were going smoothly.
Yeah. Let's not combine that subject with what is evidence.
Yeah.
That would get real nasty.
That could get that way. Okay, look, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, sir, for coming on as well. Get to you as well. Is there anything you want to finish up with?
Oh, add? Yeah, I can add.
Of course you can.
Yeah, I would like to put the idea in people's head, just try it out for a weekend sometime. Forego the whole entire notion of propositional knowledge. And just try to work with reliable beliefs, and if that fails, practical beliefs. And see how you like it. Try it on, see if it fits.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, Michael has
That's
a
a good point.
channel. Nick has In Time. Please look those up. I will try and get the links into the description for people watching after. And next week we will be on same time, probably on a day earlier. Xbox, is that okay?
Yeah, it sounds good to me. We'll give that a
Okay,
shot.
just to let
That way we
everybody know.
don't run people into the weekend, like you were saying, right into Monday, where they kind of have to stay up tonight and then get up early.
For those that are working on the Mondays certainly in Europe anyway, it's unimaginably late. Anyway, there you go. Thank you, Laura, for staying up. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody for next week's State of the Onion, when the onion will be something new. That's all I can say, really. And thank you, everybody that's been on there.
More carrots. Don't tear it. More carrots. Where's Garrett? Vegetables. Vegetables. Here I come from the west side. The left side. The right brain drives me